Story 1. The Mime-Manager. Barnaby Buttons, a man whose entire existence was a silent symphony of gestures, found himself inadvertently locked in the executive washroom of Sterling and Sterling, a global conglomerate known for its cutthroat negotiations and complete intolerance for anything that wasn't quarterly profit margins. His predicament began, as most of Barnaby's predicaments did, with a misunderstanding. He'd merely been trying to convey, through an elaborate series of invisible rope pulls and exaggerated facial contortions, that the coffee machine was out of decaf pods when Mr. Sterling himself, a man whose frown lines had frown lines, mistook his performance for an urgent, confidential message. So, you're the new silent consultant from that avant-garde negotiation firm, eh? Sterling had grunted, adjusting his perfectly knotted silk tie. Heard you're a genius at nonverbal cues. We've got a tricky deal with the Corgonians coming up. They don't speak a word of English. Your expertise is precisely what we need. Barnaby, attempting to clarify that he was, in fact, an unemployed street mime who'd wandered in looking for free Wi-Fi, launched into a frantic pantomime involving a lost wallet, a police officer, and a very confused pigeon. Sterling, however, interpreted this as a brilliant, if abstract, strategy for disarming the opposition through a shared vulnerability narrative. He'd clapped Barnaby on the shoulder, handed him a badge that read Lead Negotiator, Special Projects, and pointed him towards the executive washroom, presumably for a moment of silent reflection before the big pitch. Now, Barnaby was trapped, contemplating his fate as an accidental corporate titan, his only comfort the silent protest of a non-existent glass wall. He began to mime furiously at the locked door, a desperate portrayal of a man unjustly imprisoned. But to anyone passing by, it probably just looked like he was intensely admiring his reflection. The next morning, Barnaby found himself in the gleaming, intimidating conference room, surrounded by stern-faced executives and the oddly expressionless Corgonian delegates who, true to their reputation, communicated solely through a series of rhythmic handclaps and guttural hums. Sterling gestured grandly towards Barnaby. Our lead negotiator, Mr. Buttons, will outline our opening proposal. Barnaby, still reeling from being force-fed a power breakfast he had tried to mime refusing, stood up. He launched into his usual street mime routine, an invisible wall, a curious bird, and then, remembering his negotiator role, a dramatic tug-of-war with an unseen opponent, signifying conflict. The Corgonians exchanged a series of sharp claps. Sterling beamed. Brilliant! They understand the gravity of the situation. Now, the counteroffer, Mr. Buttons. Barnaby, flustered, tried to communicate counteroffer by miming a scale, then a seesaw, then finally, a man juggling 3 invisible bowling balls, dropping one with an exaggerated sigh. The Corgonians hummed deeply, then slowly, deliberately, clapped twice. Sterling gasped. They've agreed to the 15% profit share. Unprecedented. Your balancing act mime clearly conveyed our flexibility, yet our firm stance on the primary terms. Barnaby simply stared, his invisible bowling balls forgotten. He was just trying to mime, I'm overwhelmed and have no idea what's happening. Later, in the break room, a junior executive named Brenda approached him, wide-eyed. Mr. Buttons, your struggle with the invisible burden performance during the break was profound. It perfectly encapsulated the market's current volatility. Barnaby had been miming trying to open a stubborn pickle jar. This whole corporate world was far more abstract than he'd ever imagined. The negotiations escalated. The Corgonians, seemingly inspired by Barnaby's silent antics, began incorporating more elaborate hand gestures and guttural hums that sounded suspiciously like a frustrated badger. Mr. Sterling was convinced this was a sophisticated Corgonian negotiation tactic, a mirror to Barnaby's performance. During a particularly tense session, Barnaby, trying to signal that he needed a bathroom break, began a desperate mime of a man desperately searching for a key, then a toilet, then clutching his stomach in discomfort. The Corgonians clapped furiously, then hummed a rapid, high-pitched tune. Sterling slammed his hand on the table. They've offered the full infrastructure rights. Mr. Buttons, your urgent need for immediate resolution mime was sheer genius. They truly understood our pressing concerns. Barnaby nearly collapsed. He just wanted to discreetly ask where the men's room was. Later that afternoon, Brenda pulled him aside, a worried look on her face. Mr. Buttons, a rival firm, Gesture Global, has just called. They heard about your unparalleled nonverbal negotiation skills, and they're trying to poach you. They're offering triple your current salary and a lifetime supply of invisible props. Barnaby's eyes widened. A lifetime supply of invisible props? That sounded like a dream, though he already had an infinite supply. The absurdity of it all was starting to sink in. He, Barnaby Buttons, professional street performer of the highest nonverbal caliber, was being headhunted for a job he didn't even know existed a mere 48 hours ago. He performed a mime of a man whose head was spinning, then tried to convey too good to be true by shaping his hands into a question mark, then shrugging dramatically. Brenda just nodded sagely. Ah, the classic ethical dilemma of success. Truly profound, Mr. Buttons. The climax of the Corgonian negotiations arrived, the final signing of the multi-billion-dollar deal. Mr. Sterling had prepared a lavish spread of canapés, expecting a celebratory atmosphere. However, just as the pens were poised, the Corgonian lead delegate performed a new, unsettling series of claps and hums, followed by an aggressive, almost threatening mime of their own. A Corgonian struggling against an invisible, oppressive weight, then triumphantly smashing it with an invisible hammer. Sterling blanched. They're retracting. They're saying we're too restrictive. Mr. Buttons, you must counter this. Give them your freedom and liberation sequence. Barnaby, under immense pressure, decided to go for broke. He launched into his most dramatic piece. The butterfly emerges from its cocoon. He began as a tightly bound, struggling chrysalis, slowly, painfully, unfurling invisible wings, then soaring gracefully upwards, finally landing with a beatific smile. The Corgonians watched, their usually stoic faces softening slightly. Then, to everyone's astonishment, their lead delegate slowly, hesitantly, mimed a tiny, clumsy caterpillar, then a slightly less clumsy, awkward butterfly, before finally bowing his head. Sterling looked bewildered. What was that, Mr. Buttons? What did he just say? Barnaby, unable to speak, simply gestured vaguely towards the Corgonian with an open hand, then pointed to himself. The Corgonian delegate then offered a single soft clap, a sound of gentle agreement. Sterling, still flummoxed, watched as the Corgonian delegate pulled out a surprisingly ornate, hand-carved wooden pen and, with a satisfied hum, signed the contract. The entire room erupted in applause. Barnaby, still in his butterfly pose, blinked, slowly lowering his invisible wings. Mr. Buttons, you've done it! Sterling roared, hoisting Barnaby onto his shoulders, much to Barnaby's silent panic. The Corgonians just explained. Your cocoon to butterfly sequence represented the transformative power of partnership, transcending cultural barriers. They said they were trying to explain their own initial reluctance, but your profound display helped them see the light. Barnaby was then swept into a whirlwind of celebratory handshakes and backpats. That evening, Mr. Sterling held a press conference, with Barnaby standing awkwardly beside him, trying to mime, "I need a glass of water," which was interpreted by a reporter as the unspoken thirst for market dominance. Sterling announced Barnaby's promotion to Chief Nonverbal Strategy Officer, a newly created position with an astronomical salary and a promise of unlimited creative freedom. The news of the Corgonian deal, attributed entirely to Barnaby's unparalleled gestural diplomacy, spread like wildfire. Other corporations started calling, eager for Barnaby to mime them to victory. Barnaby, a former street performer who once made a living pretending to be stuck in a box, was now trapped in a much larger, more gilded box of corporate success. He spent his days in boardrooms, miming everything from fiscal projections, invisible graphs, to team-building exercises, a synchronized invisible rowing crew. He even acquired a personal assistant, Brenda, who was now a master at interpreting his every gesture, no matter how mundane. One afternoon, as Barnaby tried to mime that his office chair was squeaky, Brenda diligently typed, "Chief Buttons wishes to convey the subtle friction points within current operational logistics, requiring immediate lubrication of interdepartmental communication channels." Barnaby just sighed, a silent, deeply sarcastic mime of a man who had accidentally stumbled into greatness and couldn't find the invisible exit door. Story 2. The Doomsday Millionaire. Barnaby Bunker Bumble, a man whose everyday attire included a gas mask, worn casually around the neck, and a tactical vest overflowing with emergency rations, choked on his organic, locally sourced kale smoothie. The numbers on his phone screen blurred, then sharpened, then blurred again, before finally solidifying into a sequence that could only mean one thing. He, Bunker Bumble, the most prepared citizen of Peoria, Illinois, had just won the state lottery. Not a small sum, mind you, but the kind of money that usually went to people who didn't have a meticulously cataloged spreadsheet of global collapse scenarios. "This changes everything," he declared to his pet hamster, Captain Apocalypse, who was meticulously shredding a miniature prepper manifesto. "The end is nigh, Captain, but now it's a well-funded, fully stocked, aesthetically pleasing nigh." His lifelong mission had been to prepare for the inevitable societal breakdown, the meteor strike, the zombie uprising, or, at the very least, a rogue squirrel invasion. He'd amassed enough dehydrated lentils to feed a small army, built a complex system of rainwater harvesting, and could identify 27 different types of edible lichen. But now, with $27 million, his prepper game was about to go pro. His first thought wasn't a yacht or a mansion, but a reinforced underground, multi-story bunker with bespoke air filtration, hydroponic gardens, and enough MREs to last until the sun went supernova. "No more make-do, Captain," he yelled, startling the hamster. "We're going luxury apocalypse." His neighbor, Brenda, a perpetually exasperated librarian, peered over the fence, adjusting her glasses. "Bunker, are you yelling at your hamster again? Or did you just discover a new strain of hyper-aggressive dandelion?" Bunker just grinned, a manic glint in his eye. "Brenda, the dandelions will be the least of our worries. The future is here, and it's concrete reinforced." Bunker Bumble's first order of business was to secure his future, which, in his mind, meant digging. Lots of digging. He hired a team of bemused contractors who specialized in basements, but suddenly found themselves excavating what looked suspiciously like a subterranean mini-mall. "No, no, Jenkins," Bunker yelled, gesturing wildly at the blueprints, which were drawn on the back of a survivalist magazine. "This isn't a rec room. This is the post-collapse pan-global pantry. It needs reinforced steel plating and a separate, fully functioning artisanal cheese cellar, for morale, obviously." Jenkins, a man who had seen everything from indoor waterfalls to secret passages, just scratched his head. "Artisanal cheese for the apocalypse. Got it. What about the zombie defense moats you mentioned?" Meanwhile, Bunker's spending habits became legendary. He bought a military-grade drone for perimeter surveillance against mutant squirrels, a fleet of electric ATVs for post-apocalyptic supply runs, and enough dehydrated water to fill Lake Superior. He even invested in a company that manufactured designer hazmat suits, convinced that if the end came, at least he'd be stylishly protected. Brenda, his neighbor, watched in fascination as delivery trucks daily disgorged pallets of what looked like MREs and high-tech camping gear onto Bunker's lawn. "Bunker," she called over one afternoon, "are you starting a new extreme camping club or just preparing for your annual What If Wednesday a bit early?" Bunker, attempting to test out a collapsible, solar-powered water distiller, merely grunted. "Brenda, the only club I'm starting is the Survivors of Societal Collapse Elite Guild, and applications close before dawn tomorrow." He genuinely believed every purchase was a vital investment, each dollar a shield against the imminent, fiery demise of civilization. Bunker's preparations reached peak absurdity. He invested in a complex, multi-layered filtration system for his bunker that could purify anything from pond water to lukewarm bathwater, claiming, "You never know what resources you'll have post-flare." His underground complex, affectionately named Fortitude Folly by the increasingly exasperated contractors, now featured a fully stocked emergency library, mostly survival guides and post-apocalyptic fiction, a subterranean chicken coop for fresh eggs, equipped with miniature gas masks for the chickens, and a room dedicated solely to various methods of making fire without matches, including a very large magnifying glass and a strategically placed skylight. Brenda, meanwhile, had started a neighborhood watch. Not for crime, but for Bunker Bumble's bizarre acquisitions. She once saw him trying to instruct a remote-controlled forklift to stack cases of freeze-dried ice cream in a spiraling pattern, claiming it was for optimal seismic load distribution. The local news even did a segment on him, calling him Peoria's eccentric prepper, which Bunker interpreted as Peoria's foremost visionary. He was particularly proud of his escape pod, a repurposed, Heavily armored garbage truck painted camouflage green, complete with a periscope and a sound system that played only motivational speeches by historical figures. When the grid goes down, he proclaimed to an empty street, this baby will be my chariot to a new, self-sufficient dawn. His bank account, however, was rapidly dwindling, his millions being absorbed by bespoke blast doors, self-sufficient aquaponics systems, and enough tactical sporks to arm a small nation. He was almost ready, almost fully prepared for the world to end, just as his financial world was about to end with it. The day finally arrived, or so Bunker thought. A massive storm rolled in, turning the sky an ominous, apocalyptic shade of green and purple. Thunder cracked with the fury of 1,000 collapsing skyscrapers, and lightning struck a nearby transformer, plunging the entire neighborhood into darkness. It's here! The electromagnetic pulse! The grid is down! Brace for impact, Captain Apocalypse! Bunker yelled, scrambling into his escape pod, the armored garbage truck, a triumphant grin on his face. He fumbled with the periscope, peering out at the suddenly silent, darkened street. He could hear Brenda's exasperated voice from next door, yelling, "Oh, for heaven's sake, another blackout!" But Bunker didn't hear her. He was too busy activating his internal generator, which hummed to life with a satisfying growl, powering the mini-fridge stocked with artisanal emergency jerky. He was the only one prepared. He was ready for the barter system, for the struggle for resources, for the rise of the prepper elite. He imagined himself, emerging from his bunker, a benevolent warlord distributing his vast stores of dehydrated kale to the grateful, unprepared masses. He took a moment to savor the sweet taste of vindication, his years of meticulous planning finally paying off. He was just about to activate the panic room override when he heard a faint, persistent beeping. It was coming from the truck's dashboard. A small red light blinked next to the words, "Low fuel." Bunker stared at the low fuel light in utter disbelief. He had meticulously accounted for every possible disaster scenario: asteroid impacts, alien invasions, even a rogue Roomba uprising. But fuel? He had simply assumed the escape pod would have an eternal supply, powered by sheer preparedness. He'd spent millions on freeze-dried rations, solar panels, and a self-stirring compost toilet, but a simple tank of gas had completely slipped his meticulously organized mind. Meanwhile, outside, the storm quickly passed. The power flickered back on, bathing the street in a comforting, mundane glow. Brenda, his neighbor, walked over to his house, carrying a casserole dish. "Bunker? You in there?" "The power's back on. I made extra lasagna. Figured you might be tired of those dehydrated algae wafers." Bunker, still in his tactical vest, they slowly opened the armored garbage truck door. The rich aroma of baked pasta wafted in. He stepped out, his face a mixture of profound disappointment and nascent hunger. He was the only one in the neighborhood with a fully stocked gourmet emergency pantry, enough MREs to last decades, and a state-of-the-art water purification system. Yet he was about to eat Brenda's lasagna because his apocalypse chariot was out of gas. He looked at his elaborate bunker, then at his hamster, Captain Apocalypse, who was now contentedly chewing on a piece of Brenda's pre-apocalypse carrot. The world hadn't ended. It had merely had a brief power outage. And he, the Doomsday Millionaire, the most prepared man on Earth, was utterly unprepared for the most common, non-apocalyptic inconvenience imaginable. He sighed, a dramatic, defeated sound, and reluctantly followed Brenda inside, mentally adding emergency gasoline reserve to his post-apocalypse shopping list. Right after more lasagna. Story 3. Pet Psychic. People Problem. Clementine Cuttlebottom, proprietor of Positive Vibes Pet Psychics, didn't actually talk to animals. Her secret was far more mundane and significantly more lucrative. She was simply an uncannily accurate reader of human anxiety. Give her a nervous pet owner, and Clementine could divine that their chihuahua Sparky was picking up on your unaddressed financial worries, or that their tabby Mittens felt a deep concern about your recent dating choices. The owners, desperate for insight, would nod sagely, marveling at her gift, never realizing she was just projecting their own unspoken fears onto their unsuspecting furry companions. Her waiting room, adorned with dream catchers and questionable oil paintings of majestic golden retrievers, was always full. "Yes, Mr. Henderson," she'd murmur, stroking a particularly fluffy Persian cat named Chairman Meow. "Chairman is sensing a significant blockage in your creative flow. perhaps related to your persistent procrastination on that novel? Mr. Henderson, whose novel was indeed gathering dust, would gasp. How did he know? Today, however, a new challenge arrived in the form of Dr. Alastair Finch, a renowned, notoriously skeptical veterinarian. Dr. Finch, a man who believed only in empirical evidence and the occasional perfectly diagrammed bone fracture, stood stiffly in Clementine's waiting room, clutching a pristine, blue ribbon-winning show dog named Baron von Barksalot. Dr. Cuttlebottom, Finch stated, his voice as dry as kibble, I'm told you possess unusual abilities. Baron, here, has been listless, refusing his organic salmon pâté, and shows an odd aversion to his championship rosette. My diagnostic tests show nothing. My colleague suggested you. He clearly meant it as a last resort, a desperate, begrudging concession to the irrational. Clementine, sizing up Finch's tightly wound demeanor and the dog's perfectly normal, if slightly pampered appearance, simply smiled. This wasn't about Baron. This was definitely about Dr. Finch. Clementine led Dr. Finch and Baron von Barksalot into her dimly lit communion chamber, a room filled with flickering candles and the scent of questionable incense. She theatrically closed her eyes, placing her hands gently above Baron's head. Baron, a champion show dog, simply looked bored. Yes, Clementine murmured, her voice taking on a hushed, mystical tone, I'm feeling a deep sense of inadequacy, a fear of not measuring up, of always being in the shadow of a truly great predecessor. Dr. Finch stiffened, his jaw clenching almost imperceptibly. Baron has never been anything but a winner, he snapped, though his eyes darted nervously. Indeed, Clementine continued, but the pressure, the constant need to achieve perfection, to uphold a legacy, it's weighing heavily on his little heart. She paused, then added, he also feels a great frustration with a rigid schedule, a sense of being constantly micromanaged. Dr. Finch's face twitched. He was a notoriously meticulous veterinarian known for his rigid daily routines and his father's groundbreaking research in canine orthopedics. Preposterous. Baron thrives on routine. And my father was a legend. Clementine simply nodded, then dramatically sighed. And a deep-seated fear of public speaking? Of being judged on a grand stage? Baron, sensing the tension, let out a tiny, uncharacteristic whimper, then settled down for a nap. Dr. Finch, however, looked genuinely rattled. Baron gets nervous before dog shows, yes, but public speaking? He scoffed, but a bead of sweat appeared on his brow. Clementine knew she was hitting pay dirt. Baron was merely reacting to his owner's barely contained anxieties. Clementine pressed on, her readings becoming increasingly pointedly human. Baron feels deeply concerned about a recent professional setback, she intoned, a missed opportunity perhaps, that weighs heavily on his spirit, causing him to doubt his own capabilities. Dr. Finch's composure visibly cracked. Only last week he'd narrowly missed out on a prestigious grant to study advanced canine neuroregeneration, a setback he'd confided in precisely no one. Baron merely twitched an ear, dreaming of chasing squirrels. He also expresses a profound longing for solitude, Clementine continued, a desire to retreat from constant scrutiny, to simply be himself, away from the spotlight. Finch, who famously worked 14-hour days and thrived on professional recognition, scoffed, but a fleeting look of exhaustion crossed his face. Clementine then leaned in closer to Baron, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. And there's a persistent worry about a significant anniversary approaching, a date that brings both joy and a sense of impending doom, perhaps related to a deep-seated fear of commitment? At this, Dr. Finch nearly jumped out of his expensive tweed jacket. His 10-year practice anniversary was indeed next month, and his colleagues had been teasing him about the inevitable grand celebration he was expected to host, something he dreaded. This is absurd, Finch blustered, snatching Baron from Clementine's hands. You're projecting human anxieties onto an animal. Baron is a dog, not a perpetually stressed accountant. Clementine simply smiled serenely. Is he, Doctor, or is he merely reflecting the unspoken truths of his beloved companion? Baron, now wide awake, let out a single perfectly timed bark, as if confirming Clementine's every word. Dr. Finch, despite his protestations, found himself inexplicably drawn back to Clementine's quirky office a few days later, ostensibly for a follow-up on Baron's disturbing psychic diagnosis. In reality, he couldn't shake the unsettling accuracy of her pronouncements. He'd even spent an hour staring blankly at his calendar, dreading the upcoming anniversary party. Clementine, sensing his internal turmoil, decided to push the envelope. She dramatically held Baron's paw, gazing intently into his placid canine eyes. Baron is expressing a deep, unfulfilled creative yearning, she declared, a desire to explore pursuits beyond the confines of his current profession. Perhaps a hidden talent for interpretive dance? Dr. Finch choked. He had, in his youth, secretly harbored a fleeting, embarrassing dream of becoming a modern dancer, a fact he had meticulously buried deeper than his diploma. Baron merely yawned, oblivious. He also feels a considerable burden from expectations, Doctor, Clementine continued, her voice soft but firm. The weight of a legacy, perhaps, that prevents him from truly barking his own tune. Finch flinched. He lived under the shadow of his brilliant late father, and a yearning for a simpler life. A small cabin by a lake, perhaps, far from the madding crowd of competitive dog shows? Baron let out a small, contented sigh, leaning into Clementine's hand. Dr. Finch, usually so composed, began to pace. He imagined the cabin, the lake, the blessed absence of show rings and demanding clients. He stopped abruptly. This is ludicrous. Baron is a show dog. His purpose is to win. Clementine merely raised an eyebrow. Is it, Doctor? Or is that merely your purpose for him? The silence that followed was broken only by Baron's gentle snoring. Dr. Finch, now a sweating, disheveled mess of anxiety, paid Clementine's exorbitant fee without a word. Baron tucked protectively under his arm. He left her office in a daze, the readings swirling in his head. That night, instead of preparing for his next veterinary surgery, he found himself sketching designs for a small lakeside cabin. He even looked up local dance classes, albeit under a pseudonym. The next morning, Baron von Barksalot, much to everyone's shock, refused to get into his show dog crate. He just sat, staring pointedly at Dr. Finch, then at the doctor's collection of dusty professional accolades, and let out a soft whine. Dr. Finch stared back at the dog, a slow realization dawning on his face. He canceled Baron's upcoming championship, explaining to his horrified kennel club that Baron needed a mental health day, indefinitely. Instead, he took Baron on a long, aimless walk through the park. Well, something he hadn't done in years. The fresh air, the unstructured time, it felt liberating. Baron, for his part, seemed to visibly relax, chasing squirrels with unbridled joy. A few weeks later, Dr. Finch announced a radical change at his prestigious veterinary practice. He was cutting back his hours, taking on fewer, more complex cases, and starting a new canine wellness and mindfulness program, emphasizing pet owner emotional connection. He even secretly enrolled in an adult beginner's interpretive dance class, which he attended in a dark, oversized hoodie. He hadn't built the cabin yet, but he'd bought a fishing pole. Baron, meanwhile, had found a new favorite pastime, napping on the plush, sun-warmed rug in Dr. Finch's now less stressed office, occasionally letting out a tiny, contented sigh. Clementine Cuttlebottom received a thank you card from Dr. Finch, enclosed with a surprisingly generous check. It simply read, "Thank you for helping Baron find his inner peace." And mine. Turns out he was right about the cabin. Clementine smiled, then turned to her own cat, a grumpy ginger named Chairman Meow, who was currently attempting to swat a dust bunny. "Chairman," she whispered, "I'm sensing a profound need for a raise." Story 4, Zero G Zen. Commander Buzz Nebula, retired astronaut, never truly retired from space. His entire house, a sprawling suburban bungalow inexplicably shaped like a truncated rocket nozzle, was a testament to his gravitational defiance. Buzz had meticulously engineered his living space to be a zero-gravity environment, achieved through a complex system of industrial-grade magnets, precisely calibrated air currents, and an unshakable belief that feet were for landlubbers. He floated everywhere, sipping coffee from a spill-proof pouch, communicating via headset with an imaginary mission control, and occasionally bumping gently into the ceiling, which he called orbital docking maneuvers. His furniture was bolted to the floor, or rather to the deck, and he slept strapped into a bunk like a human burrito. One small float for man, he'd often intoned to his bewildered mailman. One giant leap for home living. This idyllic, albeit peculiar existence was about to be severely tested. His younger sister, Brenda Earthbound Evergreen, a woman whose entire philosophy revolved around sturdy shoes and the reliable pull of gravity, called in a panic. Her pipes had burst, flooding her meticulously organized home. Buzz, she wailed into the phone, her voice tinny through his comm system. I need somewhere to stay, just for a week, tops. Buzz, mid-float over his kitchen counter, considered. Negative earthbound. My domicile is optimized for weightlessness. You lack the necessary anti-grav acumen. Brenda, however, was already hailing a cab. An hour later, she stood at his custom-built airlock-style front door, a suitcase clutched in her hand, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and motion sickness, as she saw her brother gently bobbing near the ceiling, meticulously wiping down a non-existent viewport. Buzz, she managed, clutching the doorframe. What in the name of Newton is going on here? Brenda's first few hours in Buzz's zero-gravity abode were a chaotic ballet of flailing limbs and frustrated yelps. She tried to walk, only to push off the floor and bounce off the ceiling, her suitcase spinning wildly. Buzz, meanwhile, floated gracefully past, offering unhelpful advice. Engage your core, Earthbound. Maintain orbital stability. He demonstrated by doing a perfect, slow-motion somersault to retrieve a floating pen. It's not about walking, it's about navigating the celestial sphere of your domestic habitat. Brenda, now wedged precariously between a bolted-down sofa and a wall-mounted hydroponic herb garden, just grumbled. Every simple task became an odyssey. Brushing her teeth required anchoring herself to the sink. Eating meant meticulously chasing airborne crumbs. And using the zero-G commode, which was essentially a highly specialized vacuum, was an exercise in terror. Buzz, how do you even sleep without feeling like you're going to drift into space? She shrieked one night, as she accidentally bumped her head on a floating model of the International Space Station. It's called a sleep restraint, Earthbound. Buzz called back from his bunk, a contented sigh escaping his lips. Promotes spinal decompression. Despite the initial discomfort, Brenda noticed something peculiar. Her chronic back pain, a persistent annoyance for years, seemed to be easing. Her perpetually stiff neck felt looser. She found herself stretching in ways she never could on solid ground, almost involuntarily. One morning, she reached for a floating coffee cup, and instead of flailing, she pushed off the wall with a controlled, graceful movement. She caught the cup mid-air, a flicker of surprise, then a strange sense of accomplishment on her face. Buzz, who had been observing her from his command center, a floating armchair, raised an eyebrow. Initiating basic maneuverability protocols, I see, Earthbound. Brenda's transformation was subtle at first, then undeniably evident. She stopped clinging to every fixed object and began to embrace the float. Her morning stretches, once rigid and painful, became fluid, almost balletic, as she pushed gently off walls and ceilings, her spine elongating. Her posture improved dramatically, and the perpetual tension in her shoulders seemed to melt away. Buzz, she'd say, executing a surprisingly graceful mid-air pirouette to grab a floating magazine. My chiropractor is going to be furious. I think I'm cured. Buzz, however, was becoming increasingly agitated. His zero-G sanctuary was no longer his exclusive domain. Brenda was not only adapting, she was thriving, moving with a natural ease that almost rivaled his own. She started making suggestions. Buzz, shouldn't we install some kind of anti-drift netting in the kitchen? My toast keeps floating into your lunar landscape diorama. She even began to enjoy the zero-G commode, finding its vacuum action surprisingly efficient. She was treating his meticulously engineered, scientifically precise environment like a giant bouncy castle. He'd find her doing yoga poses he hadn't thought possible, suspended serenely in the middle of the living room, humming contentedly. Earthbound, he'd grumble, bumping into her mid-air as he tried to perform a routine meteorite evasion drill. You're disrupting my flight path. He even caught her trying to rearrange the magnets to create a low-gravity zone specifically for reading. His carefully constructed astronaut persona was cracking under the weight of her surprising adaptation. He'd wanted to tolerate her, to endure her terrestrial presence, but she was becoming an inhabitant, a very comfortable, gravity-defying inhabitant. The climax of Buzz's zero-G solitude came during his daily spacewalk simulation, which involved him floating through the house with a helmet on, talking to himself about galactic dust motes. Brenda, now completely at ease in the weightless environment, floated past him, expertly maneuvering with a gentle push off the wall. Buzz, she chirped, her voice muffled slightly by the headset she'd borrowed. I was thinking, wouldn't this be perfect for a zero-G aerobics class? Imagine the core strength. Buzz nearly tumbled into a carefully organized collection of space food packets. Aerobics? Earthbound. This is a meticulously calibrated scientific environment, not a gym. He then witnessed the ultimate affront. Brenda, attempting to tidy up, gently nudged one of his prized, framed photos of himself in a spacesuit, sending it into a slow, elegant spin. Oops, she giggled, retrieving it with a casual mid-air grab. Buzz felt his blood pressure, unburdened by gravity, rise to dangerous levels. This wasn't just adaptation, this was usurpation. His sanctuary was being turned into a celestial playground. He decided, in a fit of fraternal pique, to sabotage her newfound comfort. He secretly adjusted the air currents, creating subtle, unpredictable drafts that would send her gently spiraling into walls or furniture whenever she tried to float. He even tried to subtly disable one of the magnetic floor panels, hoping she'd feel a sudden, jarring pull back to Earth. Just a minor gravitational anomaly, Earthbound, he'd feign. But Brenda, instead of being deterred, found it exhilarating. She started incorporating the unexpected drifts into her movements, turning them into graceful, impromptu aerial dances. "Oh, this is thrilling, Buzz," she'd exclaim, narrowly avoiding a collision with a floating potted plant. "It's like living in a gentle, unpredictable currents." Buzz stared, defeated. His attempts at sabotage had only made her stronger, more adept. His home was no longer just a space simulator. It was becoming Brenda's personal, gravity-defying spa. Brenda's pipe situation was resolved, and the week was up. Buzz, secretly relieved that his personal orbital sanctuary would soon be his alone again, prepared to bid her a floating farewell. He even practiced his mission accomplished, departure imminent speech. But Brenda, instead of packing her bags, was busy meticulously adjusting one of the house's air vents, a focused look on her face. "Buzz," she began, not looking at him, "my landlord says the repairs will take another week. But you know, I've been thinking. My back pain is completely gone, my posture is incredible, and I've never felt more zen." She then executed a flawless, graceful spin, effortlessly grabbing a floating apple from a fruit bowl. "I'm staying, indefinitely. This zero-G life is surprisingly good for the soul." Buzz sputtered, his carefully constructed mission control facade crumbling. "Indefinitely? Earthbound, this is my personal space station. It's not a wellness retreat." Brenda just smiled, radiating an unexpected calm. "Oh, but it is, Buzz. Think of the market potential. Zero-G Zen, the ultimate spinal decompression and mindfulness experience. We could charge a fortune." She then gestured around the house, now seeing it not as a scientific experiment, but as a luxury health spa. Buzz, the retired astronaut, who had once dreamed of floating among the stars, found himself trapped in his own personal constellation of irony. He had created a perfect weightless environment for himself, only for his intensely practical, gravity-loving sister to turn it into a surprisingly effective accidental wellness center. He watched as Brenda began to float stretch towards the ceiling, humming a relaxing tune. His dream of solitary orbital living was now a shared, therapeutic enterprise. He sighed, a sound heavier than anything in his zero-G home, and reluctantly began to float towards the kitchen. He could use a spill-proof coffee, perhaps with an extra strong gravitational pull to his mug. Story 5. The Sentient Bean Barista. Barnaby Bean, proprietor of the Bean Whisperer Cafe, didn't just brew coffee. He communed with it. To Barnaby, every roasted coffee bean held a tiny vibrating consciousness, a bean spirit that dictated its ideal brew method and flavor profile. He swore he could hear their silent whispers, a collective chorus of "I desire a slow pour-over, please," or "Today, I yearn for a robust espresso, perhaps with a hint of cinnamon." His cafe, nestled on a quiet street corner, was filled with strange contraptions and even stranger rituals. He'd gently fondle the burlap sacks of beans, whispering encouragement, and his baristas in training, all three of whom lasted less than a week, often caught him staring intently at the espresso machine, nodding as if it were relaying urgent cosmic secrets. "The Colombian Supremo is feeling rather contemplative today," he'd gravely inform a puzzled customer. "So I recommend a cold brew to honor its inner journey." Customers, bewildered but intrigued by the consistently extraordinary, if unpredictable, coffee, kept coming back. His most popular drink, the existential espresso, was brewed only when the darkest beans conveyed a profound sense of questioning. Today, however, a storm brewed not in a coffee pot, but in Barnaby's very soul. A notoriously feared coffee critic, the formidable Dr. Alastair the Astringent Palate Finch, was in town. Finch, whose reviews could launch or sink a cafe with a single scathing sentence, was known for his analytical precision and utter disdain for anything he deemed culinary mysticism. Barnaby received an anonymous tip, which he suspected came from a jealous tea shop owner, that Finch was heading his way. "The beans are in a state of agitated anticipation, Bartholomew," Barnaby declared to his long-suffering, perfectly normal espresso machine. "They sense a disturbance in the caffeine force." He knew Finch wouldn't appreciate his unique methodology, but Barnaby couldn't betray his bean brethren. Dr. Alastair Finch swept into the Bean Whisperer Cafe with the gravitas of a prosecuting attorney entering a courtroom. He ignored the whimsical decor, the gentle hum of esoteric brewing equipment, and Barnaby's intense, soulful gaze directed at a freshly ground batch of Ethiopian Yirgacheffe. "One black coffee," Finch barked, his voice devoid of warmth. "No fuss, no frills. Just a pure, unadulterated example of your, shall we say, craft." Barnaby nodded slowly, his eyes still fixed on the beans. "The Yirgacheffe," he murmured. "It's feeling rather introspective today, Dr. Finch. A deep, quiet contemplation. I believe a Chemex will best honor its reserved nature, allowing its subtle floral notes to unfurl like a shy secret." Finch, who believed coffee should hit you like a freight train, scoffed. "Just brew the blasted coffee, barista." Undeterred, Barnaby meticulously began the Chemex process, gently pouring hot water over the grounds in slow, circular motions, humming a low, almost meditative tune. He treated each drop as if it were a precious tear, a sacred offering. Finch watched, arms crossed, a sneer playing on his lips. "Performing a ritual, are we? I'm here for caffeine, not a seance." Finally, Barnaby presented the steaming mug to Finch. "Behold, Dr. Finch," he said reverently, "the Yirgacheffe's essence, captured for your sensory journey." Finch, expecting mediocrity, took a wary sip. His eyes widened slightly. He took another, longer sip. A peculiar expression crossed his face, a flicker of something akin to surprise, then confusion, then a hint of melancholy. He looked at the cup, then at Barnaby, then back at the cup, as if it held an uncomfortable truth. "This coffee," Finch mumbled, his voice uncharacteristically subdued, "it's remarkably revealing." Barnaby just smiled, knowing the introspective Yirgacheffe had done its work. Dr. Finch, the man who had once written a scathing review comparing a barista's latte art to a startled badger in a foam bath, returned to the Bean Whisperer Cafe the very next day. This time, he didn't bark. He merely cleared his throat. "Barista," he said, holding out his empty mug, "I believe I require another introspective Yirgacheffe." Barnaby, pleased, nodded gravely. "The Yirgacheffe remembers you, Dr. Finch. It senses a nascent understanding." As Barnaby prepared the coffee, Finch paced, a strange tension radiating from him. When the mug was presented, Finch took a tentative sip, then sighed deeply. "This coffee," he muttered almost to himself, "it reminds me of my undergraduate days, before I became rigid, before I lost the joy of pure discovery." Barnaby, stirring a non-existent sugar cube into his own invisible espresso, offered, "The beans often reflect what is hidden, Dr. Finch. They are compassionate mirrors." Finch ignored him, lost in thought. Suddenly, he slammed his fist lightly on the counter, making Barnaby jump. "This is preposterous. It's just coffee. How can a beverage evoke such a profound sense of regret?" He looked genuinely distressed. "Last night, I dreamt of my old philosophy professor, Dr. Quibble, who always said I was too analytical for my own good. And I spent 3 hours staring at my reflection, questioning my life choices." Barnaby simply nodded knowingly. "The Yirgacheffe is a profound being, Dr. Finch. It asks the big questions." Finch then blurted out, "I've been offered a partnership at a prestigious, highly scientific coffee lab. It's everything I've worked for. But this Yirgacheffe, it makes me wonder if I'm on the right path, if I'm truly happy." Barnaby, always attuned to the human and bean condition, knew he had successfully and inadvertently plunged the critic into a full-blown existential crisis. The next morning, Dr. Finch arrived at the Bean Whisperer Cafe looking utterly undone. His perfectly coiffed hair was disheveled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He didn't ask for coffee. He just slumped into a chair. "Barista," he croaked, "I had a dreadful night. I couldn't stop thinking about the beans. Are they truly sentient? Are they judging my life choices?" Barnaby, who was meticulously arranging a display of single-origin pour-over cones, simply nodded. They offer guidance, Dr. Finch. Sometimes that guidance is uncomfortable. Finch buried his face in his hands. I actually called my old philosophy professor at 3 a.m. He thought I was having a breakdown. He told me to embrace the inherent contradictions of existence, which I think is just a fancy way of saying I'm crazy. This was the moment, the climax of the bean's subtle deception. Barnaby knew he had to deliver a revelation that would solidify the sentient narrative, even if it was pure psychological projection. He approached Finch with a small, unroasted bean in his palm. Dr. Finch, he said, his voice imbued with a quiet intensity, the beans have given me a message specifically for you, a revelation from the deepest recesses of the Colombian Supremo collective consciousness. Finch looked up, his eyes wide and desperate. What is it? Barnaby paused for dramatic effect. They say you are meant to write, not about coffee, but about the human condition. They believe your true calling lies in philosophical essays, in exploring the complex tapestry of life beyond the mere palate. Finch gasped. He had years ago dabbled in philosophical writing before abandoning it for the more practical world of coffee criticism. It was a secret passion he hadn't shared with anyone. How could they know? He whispered, completely convinced. Barnaby simply smiled, a master of subtle manipulation, as the sentient beans had delivered a perfectly targeted, deeply personal, and entirely accidental revelation. Dr. Finch, utterly convinced by Barnaby's bean prophecy, left the Bean Whisperer Cafe a changed man. He called his agent and dramatically turned down the prestigious Coffee Lab partnership. Instead, he dedicated himself to philosophical writing, churning out essays with titles like The Existential Grind, a reflection on ephemeral aromas, and Beyond the Brew, the metaphysics of the morning cup. His new work, though largely incomprehensible to the average reader, gained a cult following among disillusioned academics and aspiring poets. He even started carrying a small, unroasted coffee bean in his pocket, rubbing it for inspiration. Meanwhile, the Bean Whisperer Cafe saw an influx of new customers, all eager to experience the existential coffee that had so profoundly impacted Dr. Finch. They'd come in demanding a brew that questions the fabric of reality, or an espresso that whispers forgotten truths. Barnaby, unfazed, continued to consult his invisible bean council, meticulously brewing based on their moods, which now conveniently aligned with the dramatic requests of his new clientele. The cafe became a hub for deep thinkers and bewildered tourists, all seeking a cup of coffee that promised more than just a caffeine kick. Barnaby even introduced a new premium blend called the Oracle's Roast, which he claimed was a direct channel to the most ancient and wise bean spirits. He priced it accordingly. Dr. Finch, now an esteemed, albeit eccentric, philosopher, would occasionally visit the cafe, sipping his introspective Yirgacheffe, convinced that each sip deepened his understanding of the cosmos. He never realized that Barnaby Bean's genius wasn't in communicating with coffee, but in inadvertently tuning into the unspoken anxieties of his human customers, and then perfectly mirroring them back through a cleverly crafted, perfectly brewed cup. As for Barnaby, he just kept polishing his espresso machine, occasionally whispering, "Good work today, Bartholomew. The humans are truly brewing up a storm." Story 6. Opera for Complaints. Bertram Bellows, a customer complaint resolution specialist renowned for his ability to de-escalate even the most irate patrons, had a secret. An uncontrollable, highly inconvenient tic that caused him to burst into full-blown opera at random, inappropriate moments. He could be mid-sentence, calmly explaining a refund policy, when suddenly a soaring tenor aria would erupt from his throat, usually something about tragic love or a vengeful god. He'd tried everything: therapy, medication, even chewing gum with the intensity of a hyperactive squirrel, but the operatic outbursts persisted. This tic had, surprisingly, been beneficial in his previous role at a bustling call center, where angry callers often hung up, bewildered, rather than furious. But today, Bertram faced his ultimate challenge. He had been hired as a consultant by the Quietude Public Library, a bastion of hushed reverence where a dropped pin was considered a major disturbance, and a whispered conversation could earn you a stern glare from the head librarian, Miss Agnes Shush. Miss Shush, a woman whose mere presence could silence a riot, believed her library was suffering from a surfeit of unnecessary vocalizations and sought Bertram's expertise to instill absolute, unyielding quietude in her staff. Bertram, dressed in a meticulously pressed, sensible suit, stood before a room of nervous librarians, clutching a PowerPoint clicker. He cleared his throat. "Good morning, everyone. My name is Bertram Bellows, and I'm here to teach you the art of customer." Suddenly, his voice swelled, his chest expanded, and he launched into a powerful, resonant rendition of La Donna è Mobile from Rigoletto. Miss Shush's perfectly coiffed bun seemed to vibrate with suppressed fury. The librarians, however, merely looked terrified. Bertram finished with a flourish, then, flushed, cleared his throat again. "Satisfaction," he concluded, as if nothing unusual had happened. Now, where were we? Bertram began his training session, attempting to teach the librarians techniques for handling difficult patrons. "The key," he explained, demonstrating a calm, open posture, "is active listening. Let the customer feel heard, maintain eye contact, nod reassuringly, and..." He suddenly erupted into a powerful baritone rendition of a selection from The Barber of Seville, complete with dramatic hand gestures that nearly knocked over a precarious stack of art history books. Miss Shush's face, already a study in rigid disapproval, turned a shade of puce usually reserved for overripe plums. The librarians, however, seemed to be developing a strange coping mechanism. Instead of flinching, they merely blinked, then continued taking notes with an air of practiced resignation. One timid librarian, Brenda, even tapped her foot along to the rhythm, albeit subtly. Later that day, Bertram was conducting a role-play exercise. Now, imagine. He instructed a librarian named Gary that a patron is furious because their overdue fines are too high. How do you respond? Gary, looking terrified, began, "Well, sir, according to our policy." Just then, a child in the reading nook let out a piercing wail. Without missing a beat, Bertram's voice soared, effortlessly transitioning into the mournful, dramatic strains of Vesti la Juba from Pagliacci. The child, mid-wail, froze, mesmerized by the unexpected operatic lament. Its parent, who had been on the verge of a full-blown meltdown, actually stopped, a look of profound bewilderment on their face. Miss Shush, who had rushed over to intervene, found herself rooted to the spot, a single tear inexplicably forming in her eye. Bertram finished the aria, cleared his throat, and looked at Gary. "Excellent, Gary. Now, what were you saying about policy?" Gary just stared, utterly speechless. Bertram's operatic outbursts, initially a source of mortification for him and terror for Miss Shush, began to have an unexpected effect. During a busy afternoon, a patron, Mr. Grumple, launched into a furious tirade about a misplaced reservation for a rare antique book. He pounded the counter, his face purple with rage. Just as he was winding up for a truly epic complaint, Bertram's throat seized, and he launched into the rousing Anvil Chorus from Verdi's Il Trovatore, complete with synchronized and entirely accidental chest thumps. Mr. Grumple, mid-rant, froze, his jaw slack. He watched, utterly mesmerized, as Bertram belted out the powerful notes, his voice filling the usually silent library. When Bertram finished, clearing his throat awkwardly, Mr. Grumple simply stared for a long moment. Then, to everyone's astonishment, he softly said, "You know, I'm not entirely sure what just happened, but I feel strangely uplifted. Perhaps the book isn't so important after all. Just make sure the next patron gets it. All right?" He then quietly exited, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. Miss Shush, who had been hiding behind a copy of the Dewey Decimal System, peeked out. Her eyes, usually narrowed with suspicion, held a flicker of something akin to awe. Later, Brenda, the timid librarian, approached Bertram. "Mr. Bellows," she whispered, "that child yesterday, the one crying? Her mother came back and said it was the most cathartic experience she'd ever had in a library. She apparently told everyone that your aria of emotional release completely diffused her frustration." Bertram blinked. He'd just been trying not to embarrass himself. This was entirely new territory. His embarrassing tic was somehow working. The library, once a tomb of silence, began to echo with unexpected operatic outbursts. Patrons, initially startled, started to adapt. They learned to anticipate Bertram's impromptu performances, often pausing their brows to listen. Miss Shush, despite herself, found she was experiencing fewer headaches. The sheer force of Bertram's voice seemed to dissipate anger before it could even fully form. During a particularly heated exchange where a patron was complaining about a loud cough from another reader, Bertram launched into the powerful Nessun Dorma. The complaining patron, mid-sentence, stopped. The coughing patron, mid-cough, also stopped. Both sat in stunned silence, a strange calm descending upon them as Bertram's voice filled the high-ceilinged room. When he finished, a soft, collective sigh swept through the library. The complaining patron apologized for their outburst, and the coughing patron offered a genuinely remorseful nod. Miss Shush, watching from her desk, felt a shiver. It was almost as if his singing was a bizarre form of emotional white noise, drowning out irritation and replacing it with bewilderment, then peace. She even started leaving Bertram little bowls of honey and lemon lozenges on his desk. The climax arrived when a notoriously belligerent local councilman, Mr. Grumblesnatch, stomped into the library, demanding to know why the latest issue of Government Quarterly wasn't on display. He had a reputation for public temper tantrums. Just as he started his patented wind-up, Bertram, standing nearby, felt the familiar tremor. His chest swelled, his throat opened, and he unleashed the full, thunderous power of Figaro from the Barber of Seville. It was a performance for the ages, complete with invisible razors and frantic rapid-fire syllables. Mr. Grumblesnatch froze, his mouth agape, a faint blush creeping up his neck. Mr. Grumblesnatch, the notoriously ill-tempered councilman, stood utterly dumbfounded as Bertram Bellows concluded his impromptu Figaro aria with a flourish and a slightly wheezy clearing of his throat. The entire library held its breath. Then, Mr. Grumblesnatch did something entirely unprecedented. He chuckled. Not a sarcastic chuckle, but a genuine, albeit slightly bewildered laugh. "Well, I'll be," he muttered, shaking his head. "Never seen anything like that in a library before. Or anywhere, for that matter. Put a pin in the Government Quarterly thing, Barista. That was actually quite something." He then turned and left, a faint smile on his face. Miss Shush, witnessing this miraculous transformation, felt a profound shift in her perspective. Her library, once a bastion of rigid silence, had found a new, bizarre form of tranquility. Bertram's operatic tick wasn't a problem. It was a solution. She approached Bertram, her usual stern demeanor replaced by a rare, almost shy smile. "Mr. Bellows," she said, her voice softer than usual, "I believe your unique methodology has proved rather effective. Our patrons seem remarkably soothed, perhaps even entertained." Bertram, still slightly breathless from his performance, just nodded, unsure how to respond to praise for his involuntary vocalizations. Miss Shush then cleared her throat. "I've decided to extend your consultancy indefinitely, and perhaps we could consider a Quietude Public Library Opera Hour once a week." Bertram's eyes widened. His involuntary tick was about to become an official, scheduled event. The library, once a temple of hushed tones, was now occasionally filled with the soaring, magnificent sound of Bertram Bellows, inadvertently bringing peace to the perpetually disgruntled. He even started practicing subtle hand movements to accompany specific arias, turning his tick into a true art form. The patrons loved it. They often left feeling strangely calm, even if they couldn't quite articulate why. Bertram, the man who couldn't stop singing opera, had found his stage and his audience in the most unlikely of places, proving that sometimes the loudest solution is the quietest way to calm the storm. Story 7. The Accidental Inventor. Professor Quentin Quibble, a man whose lab coat was permanently stained with the glorious detritus of forgotten experiments, was not a mad scientist. He was merely a profoundly confused one. Quentin's inventions always worked, with dazzling efficiency, but never ever for their intended purpose. His latest obsession, the auto-stir mug, a device designed to automatically stir sugar and cream into one's morning coffee. He'd spent weeks hunched over his workbench, muttering to himself, surrounded by wires, circuits, and an alarming number of discarded coffee cups. "Almost there, little marvel," he'd whispered to the prototype, a clunky contraption of gears and springs attached to a ceramic mug. "Soon, no more sticky spoons." His neighbor Brenda, a pragmatic accountant who viewed Quentin's garage lab with a mixture of amusement and concern, often saw sparks flying from his windows at odd hours. "Still trying to make that mug stir itself, Professor?" she'd call out as he emerged for his daily bewildered walk. "Almost, Brenda. Just a few more tweaks to the gravitational displacement agitator," he'd reply, completely serious. Today, however, was different. Quentin had finally activated his auto-stir mug with a triumphant flourish. It hummed, it whirred, it vibrated with an intense, oscillating energy. But instead of stirring his lukewarm coffee, it emitted a high-pitched squeal, vibrated violently, and then, with a soft thwip, perfectly sorted the laundry pile Quentin had left on his workbench into separate piles. Whites, colors, and delicates. Quentin stared, bewildered, at the neatly separated piles of socks and shirts. His coffee remained unstirred. "Remarkable," he mumbled, picking up a perfectly sorted white sock. A completely unexpected, yet undeniably efficient, fabric-based categorization system. But where's my stirred coffee? He adjusted his spectacles, utterly baffled by his own genius. Quentin, delighted by his accidental laundry sorter, but still craving a stirred coffee, immediately began work on a new auto-stir mug prototype, convinced the previous iteration was just a minor miscalculation. Meanwhile, Brenda, his pragmatic neighbor, had seen the perfectly sorted laundry and, intrigued, asked about the machine. Quentin, oblivious to its true potential, simply shrugged. "Oh, that? It's just a byproduct of my attempts to perfect a beverage agitating mechanism." Not quite what I was aiming for. Brenda, however, recognized a stroke of genius. She discreetly borrowed the laundry sorter, which Quentin had carelessly left by the curb with a failed experiment sign, and used it. The machine worked flawlessly, separating her family's daunting laundry piles in minutes. Soon, word spread among Brenda's friends. "You have to see Brenda's new laundry machine. It's like magic." Demand grew. Brenda, seeing an opportunity, convinced Quentin to let her commercialize his accidental invention, promising him a cut of the profits. "It's for funding your real inventions, Professor," she'd insisted. Quentin, easily swayed by the prospect of more budget for his perpetually failing coffee-stirring endeavors, agreed. He had no idea Brenda was making millions selling his Auto-Sort Fabric Categorizer 5000, a device he considered a mere distraction. He was too busy designing his quantum beverage circulator, a new mug that vibrated so intensely it could separate coffee from cream entirely, making it useful for precisely no one. His lab became a chaotic monument to accidental success. He'd try to invent a self-tying shoelace and end up with a device that perfectly peeled and sliced apples. He'd attempt a perpetual motion machine and accidentally create a noiseless, self-cleaning vacuum cleaner. The world benefited immensely from his failures, while Quentin remained stubbornly focused on his intended, consistently unattainable goals. Quentin's garage became a hub of accidental innovation. His attempt to build a self-buttering toast rack resulted in a device that perfectly organized screws by size and thread type, an invaluable tool for carpenters. His pet-friendly perpetual back scratcher instead created a miniature, self-propelled sweeping brush that silently cleaned pet hair from carpets. Brenda, now running a booming business selling quibble innovations, found herself constantly fielding calls from various industries. "We need more of the nut and bolt nanny." "Can you expedite the furry friend floor fixer order?" Quentin, meanwhile, was completely oblivious to his burgeoning industrial empire. He just saw Brenda's requests as a reliable way to get rid of his failures. He proudly showed her his latest clunky instant sandwich assembler, a device clearly intended to construct the perfect ham and cheese. Brenda, however, immediately recognized its true, unintended potential. It perfectly shucked corn, removing every single kernel with surgical precision. "Professor," she said, trying to contain her excitement, "this is revolutionary. Think of the corn industry." Quentin merely scratched his head. "Corn, but it's meant for sandwiches, Brenda. See? You place the bread here, the ham there. It just won't combine them." He tried to demonstrate, only for the machine to expertly remove kernels from his ham, leaving a perfectly shucked, rather unappetizing slice. Brenda, fighting back laughter, just nodded. "Right. Well, I think there's a market for dekerneling ham. Trust me." Quentin, convinced he was a perpetual failure in his true calling of beverage and food automation, happily allowed Brenda to take away his latest flop for mass production, completely unaware that he was now a multi-millionaire several times over, all thanks to his inability to invent what he actually set out to. The climax of Quentin's oblivious success arrived during the annual Inventor's Fair, a local event he attended religiously, always hoping to finally unveil his perfect auto-stir mug. This year, however, Brenda had secretly entered several of his failures under a new company name, Quibble & Co. Accidental Innovations. Quentin was at his booth, proudly and fruitlessly demonstrating his latest cereal-to-milk ratio perfector, a machine that consistently overfilled bowls with milk, making soggy cereal inevitable. Just a few more adjustments, he muttered to a bewildered judge as milk sloshed everywhere. Meanwhile, across the hall, Brenda was drawing massive crowds to her sleek, modern booth. Her AutoSort Fabric Categorizer 5000 was effortlessly separating a mountain of donated clothes into pristine piles. The Nut and Bolt Nanny was receiving rave reviews from hardware store owners, and the Corn Kernel Extractor Pro was mesmerizing onlookers with its lightning-fast shucking. The fair's grand prize, the Golden Gear Award for Innovation, was announced. The presenter boomed, and the winner for revolutionizing household and industrial efficiency with a suite of groundbreaking intuitive devices is Quibble & Co. Accidental Innovations. Quentin, hearing his name, looked up from his soggy cereal demonstration, momentarily confused. He saw Brenda on stage, accepting a massive golden gear, beaming. Wait, he whispered to himself, Quibble & Co.? Did she finally get my self-peeling banana to work? He rushed over, pushing through the crowd. Brenda, what's going on? Did my toothbrush recharger finally charge a toothbrush? Brenda on stage saw him and panicked. She quickly pulled him into the spotlight, thrusting the golden gear into his hands. Ladies and gentlemen, the true genius, Professor Quentin Quibble. Quentin, holding the oversized award, stared blankly at the cheering crowd. He had no idea what it was for. He was still trying to figure out why his coffee wouldn't stir itself. Quentin Quibble, still holding the Golden Gear Award, looked around at the applauding crowd with utter bewilderment. Brenda, now officially his business manager, quickly ushered him off stage, trying to explain the situation as subtly as possible. Professor, your inventions, they're brilliant. The laundry sorter, the bolt organizer, the corn shucker. Quentin just stared at her blankly. But Brenda, my auto stir mug. It still won't stir. Brenda sighed, a testament to her endless patience. Over the next few months, Quentin's accidental inventions, under Brenda's astute marketing, made him a household name. He became a celebrity, appearing on talk shows where he'd try to explain his latest failed attempt to automate toast buttering, while the hosts gushed over his commercially successful self-cleaning pet bowl, an unintended result of his efforts to build a gravity-defying hamster wheel. He was rich beyond his wildest dreams, his lab now fully funded with state-of-the-art equipment. Yet, his personal life remained unchanged. He still brewed his coffee manually, still used a spoon to stir, and still lamented the stubborn refusal of the universe to allow for perfectly automated beverage agitation. He tried to invent a teleportation device, and instead created a machine that perfectly organized socks by color, fabric, and emotional resonance. He attempted a dream recorder and accidentally designed a gadget that instantly detected and neutralized bad breath from a distance of 10 feet. Brenda, who had grown accustomed to his peculiar genius, simply added these new failures to her product development pipeline. Quentin, meanwhile, remained happily, utterly oblivious to his true legacy. He was the world's most successful inventor of things he never intended to invent, a master of accidental brilliance. His final invention, a universal language translator, he'd hoped would let him converse with squirrels, instead produced a device that flawlessly toasted marshmallows to precisely 7 levels of golden brown. He never did get his coffee to stir itself, but his pantry was always impeccably organized, and his breath was always fresh. Story 8. The Gastronomic Guest. Bartholomew Barty Guzzle, a man whose competitive eating career was a testament to his seemingly bottomless stomach, had a secret. It wasn't a rigorous training regimen or a secret digestive enzyme. It was Kevin. Kevin was a tiny, exceedingly polite alien, no bigger than a teacup, who lived in Barty's stomach. Kevin's species, the gastropods of Glorgon 7, subsisted entirely on consumed food, teleporting it directly to their home dimension for processing. In return for Barty's hospitality and endless supply of snacks, Kevin granted him superhuman digestive abilities and the ability to consume truly astonishing quantities of food without gaining an ounce. Just a small thank you for the delicious beef Wellington, Bartholomew. Kevin's tiny, cultured voice would echo in Barty's head after a particularly gluttonous meal. A delightful blend of pastry and bovine excellence. Barty's success had made him a local legend, the human dustbin capable of downing 50 hot dogs in 12 minutes. He was currently preparing for the prestigious Frankfurter Fury National Hot Dog Eating Contest, a televised event with a grand prize of a year's supply of artisan mustard. Kevin, Barty thought, mentally addressing his internal guest. This is it. The big one. Think you can handle 80 Frankfurters? They're extra spicy. A tiny mental sigh resonated in Barty's mind. Spicy, Bartholomew? Oh dear, my Glorgonian digestive system is rather sensitive to capsaicin. It tends to reverb. Barty shrugged mentally. Reverb? What's the worst that could happen? He was about to find out. His neighbor Brenda, a woman who always brought healthy potluck dishes to block parties, looked at the mountains of hot dogs on Barty's porch with concern. Barty, are you sure you should be eating all that? It looks aggressive. Barty just winked. Just building up a healthy appetite, Brenda. The Frankfurter Fury contest was a spectacle of culinary combat. Barty, positioned center stage, felt Kevin's nervous reverb starting even before the whistle blew. The first 10 hot dogs went down smoothly, thanks to Kevin's efficient internal teleportation system. But as Barty reached for the 11th, a particularly fiery Frankfurter infused with ghost pepper extract, Kevin's tiny voice in his head sounded increasingly agitated. Oh, Bartholomew, the capsaicin levels are unprecedented. This is causing a severe temporal displacement within my gastro chamber. Barty just shrugged mentally. Suck it up, Kev. Grand prize is a year of artisan mustard. He crammed in another, then another. With the 20th hot dog, Barty felt a peculiar rumbling in his stomach, unlike any he'd experienced. It wasn't indigestion. It was a rhythmic, almost musical thrum. Suddenly, Barty let out a small, polite burp. But instead of air, a miniature, perfectly formed hot dog, no bigger than a thimble, popped out of his mouth and landed with a gentle plop on the table in front of him. The crowd murmured. The judge, a stern-faced man named Chef Antoine, squinted. What in the blazes was that, Mr. Guzzle? Barty, bewildered, quickly swallowed another hot dog to cover his tracks. But the rumbling continued, and with the 21st hot dog, another tiny, identical Frankfurter emerged, this time landing neatly in Chef Antoine's perfectly manicured beard. Kevin's mental voice was now a tiny, panicked squeak. I apologize, Bartholomew. The extreme spice is causing my internal teleportation array to invert. The food is rematerializing on the wrong side of the dimensional nexus. Barty stared at the tiny hot dog in the chef's beard, then at the rapidly dwindling pile in front of him. This was going to be a very strange contest. The Frankfurter Fury contest descended into utter chaos. With every spicy hot dog Barty consumed, Kevin's internal reverb intensified, leading to a steady stream of miniature Frankfurters erupting from Barty's mouth. They popped out with a soft thwip, landing on the table, in the water cups, and even occasionally, with surprising accuracy, directly into the open mouths of bewildered spectators. Chef Antoine, initially horrified, had now become fascinated. Mon Dieu, he exclaimed, plucking a tiny hot dog from his beard. They are perfectly formed, like gourmet miniatures. Other contestants, too busy cramming full-sized hot dogs, barely noticed the tiny ones accumulating around Barty's station. Kevin, meanwhile, was experiencing what he mentally described as dimensional indigestion. Bartholomew, his tiny voice squeaked, barely audible over the crowd's gasps, the spicy mustard is exacerbating the temporal paradox. My rematerialization matrix is severely compromised. We are creating an army of infinitesimal Frankfurters. Barty, focused on the win, just kept eating, occasionally wiping his mouth with a napkin, unknowingly scooping up a handful of the tiny dogs. News crews, alerted by the unusual spectacle, swarmed Barty's table. A commentator with a booming voice began narrating, and folks, look at this. Barty the Guzzle isn't just eating hot dogs, he's creating them. It's a new culinary phenomenon, sprout dogs. The future of food right here. Someone from the audience daringly picked up one of the tiny Frankfurters. Hey, these are delicious, they yelled, and not spicy at all. Kevin's reverb not only miniaturized the hot dogs, but also mysteriously removed the capsaicin, making them perfectly mild and surprisingly palatable. Barty, now leading the contest by a significant margin, was utterly oblivious to the culinary revolution he was inadvertently sparking. He just needed more water for the spicy ones. The sprout dog phenomenon exploded. Judges, baffled but impressed by the perfectly formed, non-spicy mini Frankfurters, declared Barty's technique revolutionary and a game changer for the future of snacking. Chef Antoine, momentarily forgetting the contest, began collecting the tiny hot dogs in a pristine silver bowl, murmuring about molecular gastronomy and culinary deconstruction. He even tasted one. Magnifique, the essence of Frankfurter, without the unnecessary bulk. Barty, oblivious to the culinary revolution he was causing, just kept eating, his eyes fixed on the remaining full-sized hot dogs, which were rapidly dwindling. Kevin, inside, was having a truly awful time. Bartholomew, I believe I've developed a spatial temporal tear in my stomach lining. Every ingestion is causing a miniature rematerialization event. My apologies, but I fear my polite mind. Alien nature is currently overridden by extreme gastrointestinal distress. Barty just grunted, wiping sweat from his brow. Just keep 'em coming, Kev. We're almost there. The climax arrived with Barty's 75th hot dog. He was neck and neck with the reigning champion, the masticator marvel. Barty shoved the spicy Frankfurter into his mouth, and with a surprisingly loud pop, a geyser of tiny, perfectly formed hot dogs erupted from his mouth, showering the front row of spectators. It was a veritable rain of miniature meat, landing in hair, on laps, and in strategically placed popcorn buckets. The crowd roared, not in disgust but in delight. A group of venture capitalists in the front row immediately started shouting, "We'll fund it! The Sprout Dog Fountain! A new catering concept!" Chef Antoine, caught in the downpour, simply closed his eyes and savored the moment, catching several of the airborne miniatures in his mouth. Barty, now just a few hot dogs from victory, was so focused on eating he barely noticed the tiny deluge he was creating. Barty Guzzle, with a final, triumphant gulp, swallowed his 80th hot dog, securing his victory in the Frankfurter Fury contest. The crowd erupted, showering him with applause and the scattered remnants of Sprout dogs. Kevin, inside Barty's stomach, let out a tiny, exhausted whimper. "The dimensional flux is stabilizing, Bartholomew," his voice echoed weakly. "But I may require a long period of interdimensional meditation." Barty, now holding the coveted artisan mustard cup, was immediately swarmed by eager investors, restaurateurs, and even a representative from a major snack food corporation. "Mr. Guzzle," one executive gushed, "your Sprout dogs are a revelation. We're talking billions. Imagine vending machines dispensing hot dogs the size of gumballs." Barty, still trying to catch his breath, just nodded, dimly aware that something significant had happened beyond his win. Chef Antoine, meanwhile, was already sketching concepts for a Michelin star restaurant featuring an entire tasting menu of deconstructed miniatures. Barty's life transformed. He became the face of Sprout Dogs, a culinary marvel. He was paid handsomely to simply eat large, spicy meals, while Kevin, recovering inside, dutifully, and less dramatically, produced miniature, perfectly mild versions. Barty still competed, but now it was less about winning and more about mass production. He'd consume a vat of chili, and miniature, de-spiced chili bowls would appear. A giant pizza and tiny, bite-sized slices would emerge. He even developed a signature move, a gentle, knowing burp that released a perfect, non-spicy miniature of whatever he had just consumed. His neighbor, Brenda, now regularly visited, not with healthy potluck dishes, but with requests for bespoke mini-snacks. "Barty, could you perhaps sprout some tiny avocado toast for my brunch?" she'd ask. Barty, the champion eater, had inadvertently become the world's most unique food manufacturer, turning excess into exquisite miniatures. He never did get that year's supply of artisan mustard. Instead, he got an entire industrial complex dedicated to Sprout Dog production, all thanks to a tiny alien's spice-induced indigestion. Story 9. The Llama Whisperer of City Hall. Bartholomew Barty Blur, a professional misinformation agent, specialized in spreading utterly benign yet captivating rumors. He wasn't about scandal, he was about subtle absurdity. His clients, mostly small businesses looking for viral marketing without the ethics violations, hired him to disseminate whispers like "all pigeons in this park secretly wear tiny hats," or "the town's oldest oak tree dispenses free compliments at midnight." His latest gig, a struggling local bakery, wanted people to believe their sourdough starter was originally smuggled out of a medieval monastery by a runaway gnome. Barty excelled at this, subtly planting seeds of ludicrousness in coffee shops and barber shops, watching them blossom into local folklore. "It's all about plausible implausibility," he'd often mused to his pet goldfish, Finnegan, who, according to Barty's latest personal project, was secretly a retired deep-sea explorer. Today, however, Barty had a far more challenging target. He was hired by a disgruntled rival to discreetly spread a ridiculous rumor about Councilwoman Carol Crum, a notoriously stern and humorless politician known for her no-nonsense attitude and impeccably tailored pantsuits. The rumor? That she secretly owned a pet llama named Lord Fluffington, who lived in her suburban backyard and wore a tiny monocle. It was designed to be silly, to make her seem absurd, a harmless distraction. Barty diligently set about his task, subtly mentioning the monocled llama in grocery store lines and at the community dog park. Heard Councilwoman Crum's new pet has quite the sophisticated air about him, always polishing his monocle with his hoof, he'd whisper conspiratorially. His neighbor, Brenda, an avid local news enthusiast, raised an eyebrow when she overheard him. A llama, Barty? Really? You're getting less believable with each passing day. Barty just smiled mysteriously. He was certain this was his masterpiece of benign disinformation. Barty Blur's monocled llama rumor spread with surprising speed, ricocheting through the town's gossip networks. People chuckled, repeated it at dinner parties, and even started making mock Lord Fluffington for mayor memes. Councilwoman Crum, usually impervious to public opinion, began to hear whispers about her dashing new pet. She dismissed it as typical political nonsense, a desperate attempt to undermine her serious image. A llama? She scoffed to her chief of staff, Barnaby, a perpetually stressed man with an impressive collection of stress balls. Preposterous! I'm allergic to wool, for heaven's sake. What Councilwoman Crum didn't know was that a few weeks prior, her eccentric Aunt Mildred had indeed bequeathed her a pet llama named Bartholomew, mercifully without a monocle, and a stern instruction in the will. He requires a good home, preferably with a nice garden. And remember, he prefers organic kale. Crum, horrified by the prospect of a llama in her manicured suburban backyard, had secretly rehomed Bartholomew to a distant rural petting zoo, hoping no one would ever know. Barty, the misinformation agent, was completely unaware of this truth. He simply thought he was crafting a perfectly absurd, harmless lie. He even started sketching a children's book concept based on Lord Fluffington's adventures in City Hall. His neighbor, Brenda, had started leaving him llama facts she'd found online. Did you know llamas are highly intelligent, Barty? And very protective? She'd inquire, completely deadpan. Barty, believing it was all part of the fun, would nod. Indeed, Brenda, especially the ones with a penchant for high society and tiny spectacles. The stage was set for a truly spectacular collision of deliberate fiction and accidental fact. The town was buzzing about a fictional monocled llama, while the very real and monocleless Bartholomew was quietly living out his days at a petting zoo, unaware of the chaos he was inadvertently causing. The rumor gained traction, morphing from monocled llama to Councilwoman Crum's secret, highly intelligent llama who advises her on zoning laws. Councilwoman Crum, growing increasingly exasperated by the persistent whispers and the llama-themed fan mail she was inexplicably receiving, decided enough was enough. She scheduled an emergency press conference to definitively quash the absurd rumors. "There is no llama," she declared, adjusting her microphone with a forceful hand. "I repeat, I do not, nor have I ever, owned a llama. This is a baseless fabrication designed to distract from real issues." Barty Blur, watching the press conference on his laptop, chuckled. His work was done. The rumor had reached peak absurdity and was now being publicly refuted, perfectly fulfilling his client's goal of light-hearted distraction. What Barty didn't know was that at the very same moment, at the rural petting zoo, Bartholomew the llama had developed a severe case of separation anxiety. Missing his original owner, Aunt Mildred, who had a peculiar habit of wearing monocles, and possibly reacting to the sudden influx of news crews at the zoo asking about famous political llamas, Bartholomew decided to escape. He calmly unlatched his gate with his nose and ambled out, setting a direct course for the most familiar address he knew, Councilwoman Crum's house, which was meticulously listed on his microchip tag. He arrived just as the press conference was ending, ambling casually up Crum's pristine driveway, munching on a stray dandelion. Councilwoman Crum's chief of staff, Barnaby, who had been listening to the press conference on his phone, looked up from his desk and peered out the window. His eyes bugged out. "Councilwoman Crum," he stammered into the phone, his voice a strangled gasp. "You might want to." Look outside your window. The climax hit Councilwoman Crumb like a stray, impeccably aimed spitball. Just as she was concluding her fiery denial of llama ownership to a room full of eager reporters, her chief of staff, Barnaby, burst through the door, phone still clutched in hand. Councilwoman! The llama! It's at your house! Right now! The reporters, sensing blood, or at least a very good story, immediately swiveled their cameras towards Barnaby, then collectively scrambled for the door. Outside, at Councilwoman Crumb's perfectly manicured suburban home, a large, fluffy, entirely monocleless llama named Bartholomew was contentedly nibbling on her prize-winning rose bushes. He looked up, his large, placid eyes blinking, as a stampede of local news vans screeched to a halt in front of the house. Councilwoman Crumb, arriving moments later in a flurry of outrage and indignation, saw Bartholomew calmly surveying the chaos he'd caused. "Bartholomew, what are you doing here?" she shrieked, instantly regretting calling him by name. The flashbulbs erupted. Reporters shouted questions. "Is this Lord Fluffington, Councilwoman? Did you lie about your secret pet? What are his views on urban green spaces?" Barty Blur, watching the live news report from his living room, nearly choked on his organic kale chip. His benign misinformation had accidentally stumbled upon an inconvenient, very real truth. He had expected a harmless, debunked chuckle, not a genuine political scandal involving a rogue herbivore. Bartholomew, sensing the tension, chose this moment to let out a surprisingly loud, resonant mwah-ha-ha sound, which the news anchors immediately dubbed Lord Fluffington's triumphant bray. Councilwoman Crumb, on the verge of tears, instinctively put her hand on Bartholomew's head to push him away, only for him to lean into her touch with an affectionate nuzzle. The cameras captured the tender moment. The image of Councilwoman Crumb, a paragon of political stoicism, sharing a tender moment with a very real llama named Bartholomew, went viral. The initial outrage quickly transformed into an outpouring of public adoration. People found her secret pet endearing, a charming, unexpected glimpse into her human side. Far from destroying her career, the Llama-Gate scandal inadvertently humanized her. Her approval ratings skyrocketed. Barty Blur, the architect of this accidental political triumph, watched in stunned silence as Councilwoman Crumb, embracing her new public image, held a follow-up press conference. Bartholomew, freshly groomed and sporting a surprisingly stylish yet monocle-less custom-made blanket, stood placidly beside her. "I admit," Crumb announced, a slight smile playing on her lips, "Bartholomew's arrival was unexpected. But he has reminded me of the simple joys in life and the importance of connecting with our natural world." She even announced a new, llama-friendly city parks initiative, which was met with thunderous applause. Barty's client, the rival who had hired him to discredit Crumb, called furious. "You've made her more popular. She's now the llama whisperer. This is a disaster." Barty could only mumble apologies, utterly bewildered by the butterfly effect of his benign misinformation. Councilwoman Crumb, now known affectionately as the Llama Whisperer of City Hall, began incorporating Bartholomew into her campaign events. He would calmly graze while she gave speeches, his placid presence seemingly radiating a calming effect on even the most aggressive constituents. She won re-election by a landslide. Barty, meanwhile, found his services were no longer in demand for benign misinformation. His new niche was accidental PR triumphs. Businesses now hired him specifically to unintentionally create viral sensations that backfired into success. He tried to start a rumor that a local coffee shop's barista could control the weather with his mood, hoping it would attract a quirky crowd. Instead, the barista accidentally triggered a perfect sunny day for a local street festival, leading to record sales. Barty, the master of subtle absurdity, had become the unwitting king of unexpected positive outcomes, all thanks to one very well-timed and very real llama. Story 10. My Life, the Reality Show. Brenda Drama Daly lived her life as if a camera crew was perpetually following her. Every mundane act, every quiet moment, was imbued with the exaggerated gravitas of a primetime reality show. She narrated her thoughts aloud, added dramatic pauses before opening her refrigerator, and often provided confessional cutaways to an imaginary audience, even when alone. And that, she'd whisper to the toaster as her bread popped up, is the kind of high-stakes morning drama you just can't script. Her apartment, a surprisingly normal one-bedroom, was, in her mind, a meticulously designed set, and her long-suffering pet goldfish, Sparky, was her constant, silent co-star. She believed she was the subject of a groundbreaking, immersive reality series, a social experiment in unfiltered existence. No one had ever told her otherwise, and she'd certainly never questioned it. This delusion had, surprisingly, never interfered with her employment, as she typically worked from home as a freelance proofreader. But now, she needed a new job, a public-facing one, to provide fresh narrative arcs for her viewers. "The fans are demanding more conflict, Sparky," she'd announced to her goldfish that morning, striking a dramatic pose by the window. More raw, authentic human interaction. She'd scoured job listings, looking for something with high emotional stakes and unpredictable cast members. The answer arrived in an unexpected email. "Assistant funeral director, embalming experience preferred, but not essential. Compassion and discretion are key." Brenda gasped. A funeral home. The ultimate arena for raw emotion. The perfect setting for a reality show about life, death, and the occasional dramatic monologue from the lead character. "Sparky," she narrated, leaning conspiratorially towards the fishbowl. "This is it, my most ambitious season yet. Prepare for tears, triumphs, and probably a few surprisingly comedic moments. The ratings are going to be through the roof." Brenda's first day at Evergreen Funeral Services was, in her mind, a captivating pilot episode. She arrived in a demure black dress, mentally noting the tasteful yet somber decor. "The mood lighting in here is chef's kiss," she narrated in her head. Her new boss, Mr. Grimshaw, a man whose natural expression was one of perpetual mournfulness, gave her a brief tour. "This is the viewing room," he intoned, gesturing to a velvet-draped space. "Discretion is paramount here." Brenda, however, saw only dramatic potential. "Here, in the hallowed halls of Evergreen," she whispered to her imaginary camera, adopting a solemn voice, "we witness the raw, unfiltered tapestry of grief. Will our protagonist maintain her composure, or will the emotional weight of it all push her to the brink?" Her first task was to arrange flowers for a wake. As she meticulously placed a lily, she provided a running commentary. "A moment of quiet reflection, dear viewers, as I connect with the floral essence, each petal a silent tear. Will this arrangement truly honor the departed? The pressure is immense." Mr. Grimshaw, observing her odd intensity, merely blinked, attributing it to new employee nerves. He'd seen stranger reactions to grief. Later, during a private family viewing, Brenda watched, poised, ready for her confessional. The deceased's nephew, Barnaby, a particularly tearful young man, began to wail loudly. Brenda seized the opportunity. She dramatically knelt beside him, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "In this moment of profound sorrow," she whispered, loudly enough for her microphone to pick up, "the line between observer and participant blurs. Can one truly remain detached when faced with such raw human pain?" Barnaby looked up, startled, then, surprisingly, stopped crying for a moment, momentarily distracted by Brenda's bizarre intensity. Mr. Grimshaw, noticing Barnaby's sudden quiet, nodded approvingly at Brenda. "Excellent, Miss Daly. A surprisingly effective comforting technique. Keep up the good work." Brenda beamed. The ratings, she knew, were soaring. Brenda's unique approach to funeral services began to yield unexpected results. During a particularly solemn cremation ceremony, the deceased's estranged daughter, Carol, began to bitterly recount a lifetime of grievances against her departed father. "He never listened," she railed, tears streaming down her face. Brenda, seeing a prime dramatic confrontation unfold, stepped forward. "And in this moment of raw, unresolved conflict," she narrated, addressing her invisible camera with solemn intensity, "we see the enduring power of family dynamics, even in death. Will redemption be found, or will lingering bitterness cast a shadow upon the final farewell?" Carol, mid-rant, stopped, a bewildered look on her face. "What are you talking about?" she asked, momentarily distracted from her anger. Brenda simply maintained her intense gaze. Carol, surprisingly, then took a deep breath. "You know what? You're right. It is complex. He wasn't all bad." Mr. Grimshaw, watching from the back, was astounded. The daughter, notorious for her fiery temper, had actually calmed down. He'd never seen such a swift de-escalation. Brenda then provided a mental confessional. "Sometimes, dear viewers, the most effective therapy is simply a well-timed, profound observation." Her reputation as a compassionate, if a little eccentric, funeral assistant grew. Families started specifically requesting the one who talks like a documentary. They didn't understand why she was narrating, but they found her strangely comforting, her dramatic pronouncements somehow giving gravitas and meaning to their grief. Brenda, meanwhile, was convinced she was delivering an Emmy-worthy performance. The climax arrived when a particularly high-profile and emotionally charged funeral for a beloved local mayor was scheduled. The mayor's widow, a woman known for her stoicism, was expected to remain composed, but Brenda sensed an opportunity for a dramatic breakthrough. The mayor's funeral was a grand affair, attended by politicians, dignitaries, and every local news crew in a 50-mile radius. Brenda, dressed impeccably in her black suit, felt the thrill of her biggest episode yet. The mayor's widow, Mrs. Bethany Stone, was delivering a eulogy, her voice trembling slightly. "He was a good man," she began, struggling to maintain her composure. Brenda, sensing the impending emotional dam break that would provide peak dramatic tension for her audience, mentally zoomed in for her confessional. "Will Mrs. Stone falter under the public gaze?" she whispered in her mind. "Or will she rise above, a beacon of strength in the face of insurmountable grief?" Just as Mrs. Stone's voice cracked, Brenda decided to intervene for maximum narrative impact. She stepped forward, standing dramatically beside the widow, and began to narrate, her voice clear and resonant, completely audible to everyone in the packed funeral home. And here, dear viewers, we witness the quiet heroism of a grieving spouse, the raw courage required to articulate a lifetime of love and loss. Each tear, a testament to an unbreakable bond. The unspoken pain, a shared human experience. Mrs. Stone, mid-eulogy, paused, utterly bewildered. She looked at Brenda, then at the assembled mourners, who were all staring at Brenda with a mixture of confusion and profound concentration. Mr. Grimshaw, aghast, rushed forward, whispering furiously, "Miss Daly, what are you doing?" But Brenda was in the zone. She continued, "Will this eulogy be a moment of quiet despair or a triumphant celebration of a life well lived? The emotional arc is reaching its peak." Mrs. Stone, instead of being offended, found herself strangely captivated by Brenda's theatricality. She took a deep breath, and a surprising calm settled over her. The mourners, instead of being distracted, seemed to lean in, mesmerized by Brenda's dramatic yet oddly comforting commentary. Brenda had accidentally given the eulogy a meta-narrative, transforming it into something both bizarre and deeply compelling. Mrs. Bethany Stone, the mayor's widow, concluded her eulogy with newfound strength, buoyed by Brenda's bizarre, live commentary. The mourners, though initially confused, found themselves strangely comforted by Brenda's dramatic yet oddly uplifting narrative. It was as if she'd given voice to the unspoken emotions in the room, making everyone feel more connected to the collective grief. Mr. Grimshaw, watching the remarkable effect Brenda had on the crowd, knew he had stumbled upon something extraordinary. The funeral home, usually a place of hushed whispers and stifled tears, was now known for its uniquely empathetic approach. Families started specifically requesting the narrator, convinced she possessed a rare gift for making even the most somber occasion feel profoundly meaningful. Brenda, for her part, was convinced her season finale had been a roaring success. She received fan mail, mostly from bewildered family members thanking her for the strange but beautiful service, and imagined her show was being picked up for multiple new seasons. Her confessionals became even more elaborate, detailing the inner turmoil of choosing flower arrangements or the existential dread of coordinating pallbearers. Mr. Grimshaw, instead of correcting her, leaned into it. He rebranded Evergreen Funeral Services, marketing it as the compassionate narrators of life's final chapters. He even hired more staff, instructing them to observe and reflect, subtly encouraging them to adopt Brenda's detached yet oddly comforting commentary style. He opened a new branch, and Brenda was made head of Experiential Grief Counseling, a department entirely based on her accidental therapeutic method. Brenda's life truly had become a reality show, but not in the way she imagined. She was a star, not because of some unseen camera crew, but because her eccentric delusion unexpectedly brought comfort and even a strange form of joy to those grappling with loss. She never knew her viewers were the grieving families themselves, finding solace in her unintentionally profound observations. As for Sparky the goldfish, he remained Brenda's silent co-star, occasionally getting a dramatic close-up when Brenda decided his silent contemplation of the infinite was a crucial plot point. Thanks a ton for watching all the way to the end. We hope you had a good laugh and a great time with our little slice of chaos and comedy. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to hit that like button, drop a comment, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you never miss a moment of the madness. See you in the next episode. And remember, life's funnier when you laugh with us.